Welcome back to Ciminelli Chats, where we aim to share the latest news, real estate industry insights, and announcements. I'm Grace Harner, and today we have a fascinating conversation lined up with two distinguished guests, Roy Abernathy, a recognized leader in workplace strategy and human experience at Newmark, and Kyle Ciminelli, president of Newmark Ciminelli. Roy brings over 27 years of experience to the table and has worked across more than 15 million square feet of real estate, from major corporate mergers to law, education, and healthcare spaces. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Roy, we're thrilled to have you. Could you tell us a little bit about your background with Newmark and what brings you to Buffalo?
I've been with Newmark for going on 8 years, and I came to Newmark to really run the consulting practice here. And so a lot of our focus is really working with clients on things that result in real estate, but really from their perspective are, aligning the goals of the organization with the real estate portfolio to drive behaviors in the workforce. And that's a lot of what we talk about and kind of how we're different in Newmark. We're here to help you use place to drive behavior. I feel like Buffalo is my second home. Over the past 20 years, I think I've worked with the development of 8 buildings in the market and across the border in Canada and around Toronto. Everything from Delaware North's headquarters here, where we actually won a state ULI award for the development of that facility, to working with a current client we have here in the market now, Moog, on their global portfolio, but also law firms like Harder Seacrest, Phillips Lytle's redevelopment down at Harbor Center. A lot of things have kind of reshaped Buffalo over that last 20 years. Buffalo is a great architecture city, and as an architect, I've always enjoyed kind of coming here and, help it at least lend some aspect to the future, kind of how it's grown.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah, I know, Roy, it's, obviously you and I have had a lot of interaction over the years, whether it was when I was in New York City or moved back to Buffalo. But I think what was very cool is to see, while I was in New York, being a Buffalonian, how much success you were having in representing some of our more forward-thinking companies throughout Buffalo, whether it's Delaware North or Phillips Lytle, and really played an impact on the development and the landscape of our city. And it's cool to now be back here trying to do that along with you on your side, whether that be with Moog or whoever else we're currently working with in other pursuits. So it's been a cool transition to come back to Buffalo already knowing how much you've done here.
But it's been a great trip, and I think looking forward to the future, it's going to be interesting to see how organizations, and especially kind of the transitions that we're all going through, are kind of going to continue to reshape the city.
Yeah, and I think it's our goal here at Newmark Ciminelli to even get you in front of more of the companies throughout Western New York, because I firmly don't believe enough companies, mid-size, large, or small, put enough emphasis on what you do and how, everything you just described of the behaviors that relate to real estate. It's it's really hard in a smaller community like this to get them to focus on the level of detail that you provide.
Well, and it's interesting. I was a client of Newmark at one point in time as well, and both at Accenture and at Comcast. And the reality was, a lot of what we offer from a consulting perspective, is a service that we provide to clients. And you're right, a lot of clients don't take advantage of that service, or kind of either whether it's peer benchmarking or kind of understanding what others are doing, or really just understanding like what your workplace potential might be. Organizations focus on kind of housing people historically, and the reality is, if you can drive up productivity, innovation, creativity by 20 to 40% by really tailoring the workplace to the behaviors you need to drive in the organization, you're really getting the most out of your investment in that model. And so many companies try to do that on the back end, rather than really trying to do it on the front end and throughout the process. So, what we do is a huge benefit. It's just, you're right, the organizations that take advantage of it are the ones that really kind of, maximize the success and the potential of it.
Amazing. Could you kind of walk us through some of the biggest shifts you're seeing in workplace design and strategy today, speaking of those transition and where we might see ourselves in the future?
Well, I think the volatility around what hybrid means, and we started the conversation around kind of the 25 is going to be the year of the mandate. Organizations have had mandates, so 2, 3, 4 days in the office, but they haven't really enforced them historically. The big shift we're seeing now is organizations are both tracking and kind of enforcing what they put in place. I just got back from a study in the UK where in the UK they're using bonuses to really push people to come back in because they're tying in-office time to performance. And so if you're not in the office based on the mandate, they're keeping part of your bonus. And so you're going to see different ways to really structure the incentives. I think that the age of the free lunch is kind of past. And so, understanding the real benefit to the organization, the benefit to the individual, and especially something we overlook, the benefit to the team, and helping a team of people really accelerate what they can do, accelerate decision making, accelerate creativity is kind of the key that we're seeing. Translate that into design. We talk about me, we, and us spaces. And so me spaces are your individual office, your workstation, the space that's allocated to you. The us spaces are part of the community or the organization. So think of like the break room or kind of common areas. The we spaces, which is really the team spaces, are becoming more of the focus. And we're sitting in a conference room that, actually there's a company here that has their conference room from 1926. The table layout's the same. They just added a monitor at the end of the room. The reality is when we come together to work with each other versus, just to meet, the room probably wants to look different. And so it's not long and rectilinear. It might be square. The technology might be oriented differently. And a lot of organizations don't have spaces that can be easily converted that are that shape even. And when you think about, we're much more active when we stand. So we've been doing sit stand as kind of a push since COVID. So, how do you work with other people in a meeting where you're more standing, you're more active? We've been working with the United Nations in a redevelopment of 1 million square feet, Kyle, in New York. You'll know all the buildings that were in the neighborhood that are part of the consolidation. But, we can even measure CO2 levels in the conference rooms or the meeting spaces. And we can know how much were people talking, how much were they actively engaging by were their respiration rates up. And so now we can start to track, are the rooms really shaping and driving collaborative behaviors? Or are people basically, coming in the conference room, sitting back in the chair and, less actively chatting or engaging in the process? So all those things around design are becoming much more data and data science informed, much more tailored to the behaviors you're trying to drive, and then much more tailored to how you use a whole range of tools to kind of support the workforce.
So if we would have asked you this question 2018, 2019, how different would your answer have been?
2018, 2019, we were still focused on housing people. So our conversation started with, what are your numbers today? What does your growth look like? What we walk in today and start talking about is, what are the challenges you're facing? What's the competitive nature of your organization? And a really difficult question for a lot of leaders to answer is what are the behaviors that you want to try to drive? And a lot of leaders will say, oh, we need more collaboration. And I'm like, well, that's great. There's 8 types. Yeah. So of the 8 types, your space only accommodates 4 of those today. The other 4 are focused on team behaviors and personal growth and mentoring. And so, where do you want your real estate portfolio to focus going forward based on how you want to leverage space to support the workforce? And so that's probably the biggest shift.
That's so interesting to see how quickly it evolved.
Yeah, it's so interesting. We're so lucky to have such a human-centered design at Fountain Plaza even, but it seems like there are so many layers to unravel. It's crazy.
Trying to think about it from kind of your front door to your desk. And a lot of the focus today is on what's the experience like. And so if you're on a call coming into the office, that's like a normal part of your day now. And so you have to manage the transitions. The call doesn't get dropped. I was on a call this morning with one of my team driving from here down to East Aurora. And, we get to that part on the freeway where the call gets dropped and they're like, I can't hear you. I can't hear you. I can't hear you. I'm like, okay, I'll send you an email. And so, just looking at kind of the impact of place and kind of how things fit in the community is probably more critical than it has been before. And, Fountain Plaza is so well, located from a city perspective, from the amenities to, what you have kind of in the building and in the neighborhood. And then other aspects of it too, just relative to kind of what people's preferences are from a lifestyle perspective.
Interesting. Yeah, I think about the conference call. I had to finish sitting in my car outside the garage because if I would have pulled in, I would have lost it, and then had to regroup when I got upstairs. So makes sense. I remember in 2021, 22, 23, when Workplace Wednesdays really took off, and our entire office and I think in those years were really in tune. And and just by way of background, Workplace Wednesdays is the monthly meeting that Roy hosts amongst all the Newmark offices across the country to update us on the latest trends in the workplace. It's really helpful and really informational, and we try not to miss one. But what I remember from the beginning post-pandemic is that we were always following the metrics of the hybrid policies throughout the country, and how they varied between different cities that relied on public transportation and those that didn't, and how they varied between different industries. What are you sort of seeing today between industries and types of cities in terms of how they are viewing hybrid and using hybrid?
So, and again, you look at what's communicated as the expectation versus the reality. Some of the utilization is tracking the reality behind it. Mm-hmm. If you look at the mandates or the expectations from employers climbed to like 2.6 days a week on average. And some of the markets that were lagging were like the Chicago marketplace, New York for a while, but New York caught up, early or late in 2023, early in 2024. Mm-hmm. Chicago caught up, San Francisco really lagged for a long time, but it's now kind of shown a lot of improvement in number of days in the office. But we've gone from the low twos, which meant we were in 2 days a week on average, to the high twos. Now we're in the threes coming into 2025. The first quarter had some weeks that were in the 3.6, which is kind of approaching 4 as far as days in. And so you've seen a big shift. And again, that's why we came out and said that this is going to be the year that the mandates get enforced, because we're seeing the workforce, whether you consider it to be, accept the mandate or the employer, in some way kind of leverage or punish if you don't meet the mandate. A lot of CEOs are talking about it. A lot of organizations are talking about how important it is. Mm-hmm. And you've seen some pullback. So like Amazon came out and said it's going to be 4+ days in. And they came back and said, we don't quite have enough real estate. Now they're back to pushing 4 days in. Mm-hmm. So I think, Workplace Wednesday has been a great kind of historical barometer around all these different aspects. And the nice thing about that platform is we actually look at, not just what we're saying and seeing in the marketplace, but we go out and do a barometer to look at what other people are saying in the marketplace. So you get a good employer view and an employee view as a part of the process as well. So we've enjoyed it and we're continuing to do that. But, the shift in the focus around behavior, I think is going to be a lot of the influence as we go through this year too.
And I've shared a lot of that with my C-suite. That's been hugely important. It was sort of a shift from me more sharing everything with my brokers now to bringing everything in with my executives. So it's really cool how Workplace has evolved, and Workplace Wednesdays has evolved in that fashion. And when you mentioned getting close to 3 days a week, is that pretty consistent across all industries? Or are you still seeing tech sort of lagging?
Tech is picking up. Okay. And especially if you look at the influence of kind of the AI aspect of tech, all of the AI organizations are in 4 days plus because they're trying to really create an industry. And so you saw that same thing at the beginning of the tech boom that kind of everybody was in. So we've seen tech go from one extreme in the pendulum to another extreme in the pendulum. And we expect that to continue, whether it's the Microsoft and that being a division of kind of what they're doing to some of the startups in the process. So, I would say that tech is caught up to where we've been. Financial services is making a big push. Law's always had a pretty balanced approach, depending on kind of what your level was within the law firm. But even some of the kind of creative and media companies that were a little on the light side, you're seeing those elements of the workforce come back in as well. So, we're projecting by the end of this year that the mandates will be somewhere between 3 and 4 versus kind of 2 to 3 days in, and that we'll see adoption rates in the low 3s.
So at that point, if you're looking, you're talking about 3 to 4. We're not talking about space reduction in the way we were a few years ago.
No, and the most important aspect of it is you're not talking about a space reduction, but there's still this big gap around the we spaces. Mm-hmm. And so if you think that people are coming in the office to really work together, working together in teams of, one of the things we found at Accenture is teams or projects would kind of start with 2, ramp up to 4, and then kind of get to 6 to 8 from a teaming perspective. And there were whole buildings we planned at Accenture kind of around that model. If you kind of, play that out from a room and a physical space and a teaming perspective, it's hard for 8 people to work together if they're in an open plan workstation environment. That's when you really need to get to like project rooms and other kinds of shared and team spaces that most organizations just don't have. And we compressed our workplaces so much when we went to benching for kind of the open plan areas that there's not a lot of like extra space that we can modify to create these team spaces.
Yeah, density used to be the name of the game, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's a one-size-fits-all approach, and it's about kind of recognizing that need for improvement. But speaking of, are you seeing a need for that environmental performance piece in the office?
Yeah, and we're actually something that will come out in Workplace Wednesday in the next cycle is we are looking at organizations should be considering that their employees are athletes. And so industry athletes within different aspects of kind of what they're doing. And so, how do you perform at the top of your game as within tech? How do you perform at the top of your game within law? And how does the space, everything down to like nutrition, down to fresh air. We talked a lot about during COVID about the filtration in buildings. And a lot of what we're seeing in kind of the migration to Class A is relative to environmental. So relative to fresh air, to daylight, to, things that help you cognitively perform well. And, one of the things that we're going to come out and talk about in this next Workplace Wednesday is, if you can get a 40% improvement in the performance, the accuracy, the creativity, and the innovation within your workforce, that's a game changer from the competitive nature for an organization. And especially with everything that's going on right now, organizations are focused on, kind of dealing with disruptions, not knowing what's next and having to react quickly. So, everything from kind of the green and sustainable aspects of it to, smart choices around nutrition, having people be more mobile, kind of throughout their day and all the implications associated with that. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately, kind of tying everything back to this like athleticism associated with really being a top performer, in your industry and in your role. And so, industry athletes is kind of a new, kind of quip that we're bringing into Workplace to talk about how do you use Workplace to do that.
That's a fantastic analogy. I don't think I'll forget that one.
It's coming from a G1 athlete over here, Grace. So yeah, music to her ears.
I wasn't looking, but I mean, can you guys can you draw a line when sneakers came into Class A office environments?
Well,
3 years ago for us. Yeah.
I just started my career about a year ago, so.
But it is interesting. Like one of the first things we did with Walgreens when we redid their campus in Chicago is we came in and we said, you have to have a new dress policy because you had to come in a coat and tie. Mm-hmm. And we were asking people in coats and ties to go sit at a bench in a much smaller space, to be much more active, to carry their laptop and their phone with them at the same time. You only got 2 hands. Yeah. And one of the things that we found is by changing the dress policy to really, and we focused on business casual, which has kind of turned into kind of an athletic influence on the suit and tie aspect. That was probably the most positive thing we did for productivity and creativity at Walgreens.
Wow.
Yeah, it's so interesting. If I'm comfortable, I am.
Remember a time before?
No, I know. I was just about to talk about a time before. When I started at Newmark, the HQ in 125 Park in 2004, if you didn't have your tie up to your neck, if you had a button open, they wouldn't let you in. And that, now I go back to visit my old colleagues in the HQ in New York, and there's hooded sweatshirts throughout and sneakers.
Well, I mean, you and I have the vest on, which is like the uniform.
Yeah, that's a Midtown uniform. Yeah. And, but it's just from where it went in '04, from when I was there to now, it looks like a Lululemon commercial in that office. It's gone a long way. So.
And when you think about it, it's more comfortable because it's easier to be more active.
Yeah.
And so one of the other things we're doing in the workplace is like, now you have all these devices that you're bringing with you. We're projecting in 5 years that you won't be carrying your laptop anymore, that you'll carry your phone, and your phone will somehow dock into something when you go into spaces, because we're having lots of like slips, trips, falls, dropping the devices.
Mm-hmm.
And we did some work with HP on that like years ago. And so what do you do when you have to go to the restroom?
Yeah.
And so where do you put your laptop? It's things that we didn't have to think about in the workplace not that long ago. But sneakers are a great example for me of kind of where this industry athlete concept comes from, because now you think about, sneakers or some sort of casual wear before you think about like, dress wear relative to shoes or your clothing. It's just another indicator. So for us, COVID kind of brought in a number of innovations. One, it accelerated hybrid, but it probably accelerated it too far and too fast. So we were always going to land in the middle. And so we're kind of making the change back to that. The second is from a dress code. And then the third is from a technology enablement. I don't think AI would be where it is today if we had not gone through COVID.
Interesting.
Because I don't think we would trust the technology the way that we are now without being forced to trust it with Zoom and Teams.
That's such a great point.
Yeah.
We truly relied on it, and we would be lost without it. So putting that trust in, that's such a great concept.
It's a good bridge to, I think, another question we were both planning on asking is how has AI sort of changed your world over the last couple of years in terms of, obviously, I know we're working with some pretty high profile AI companies, which is phenomenal for Newmark, but also, how has it changed your day to day?
So we do a lot more predictive modeling than we've ever done. And I did some of this in my prior roles within consulting, but it was all done on paper. And we used to do Monte Carlo simulations and kind of run these, probability analysis of every potential aspect of a decision that could be made. Using AI to test like perceptions, to test, how will a workforce look at this as a change, as an example. So using it to emulate some of the, very statistically driven predictive modeling that we were doing before. So we talk about like, within the consulting world, people will gravitate to something that is fast, right, economical, and easy. So they'll always gravitate to what's free. And so, fast means it makes their job easier. They can complete a task faster. Right means the outcome is correct, or the outcome is right, or it's the right fit for what they're trying to do at the moment and the tools they have available. Economical, it can't cost more to go down this model. And then easy has to be, something that is easier than the way they did it before. And that's where AI is really the biggest enabler. And so it allows you to test before you buy. It allows you to have almost a third voice or a third party to whatever you're doing as a consultant, to really kind of help you think through things and look at it from a different perspective. And so we use AI a lot to kind of run predictive models and understand the implications kind of outside of maybe even a sampling group that we have. So I love to ask it, what would my grandfather say if I told him he was no longer have a desk in the office? And I've kind of built this model over time where, I fed it information on my grandfather and his history. And, my grandfather ran furniture factories and was very industrial based in what he did and very linear. And, for him, change was slow. And so like a great example is he would send my dad and I to Europe to go find pieces of antique furniture, bring them back to the US, and we would knock them off. So before China was ever knocking off like things that we've come up with, my grandpa was knocking off like, French antiques. And so, for him, change was kind of going backwards in history to something that was proven, that was iconic and that people loved. Because of that, I fell in love with modern furniture and kind of a modern aesthetic. Getting my grandpa to ever make a shift to kind of Herman Miller or Knoll or what we see today is kind of popular in office environments would have been a massive change. But using AI to kind of test concepts around kind of generational shifts and how are 5 generations in the office going to, take the fact that we're going to do away with sneakers and that you now need to be more formally dressed when you're in the office.
Yeah, I think that's one of the other really impactful things we've seen coming out of Workplace Wednesdays is the difference in the generations and how simply you organize it, but how different all of them really are, and how different we as leaders have to communicate with each generation.
And it's hard to take off your glasses and see the world differently than you've seen it in the past. And if there's anything I can suggest to leaders, to real estate consultants, to our brokers and our clients, walk around the office and observe what people are doing, observe what they're frustrated with. One thing we do with law firms is law firms tend to be very office focused, and the individuals tend to be very my office focused. A lot of times we can come and sit with them in their office and say, what about your office layout frustrates you the most? And they'll say, oh, well, there's like this storage unit that doesn't work well, and I have these books that I refer to all the time, and I put them here because it doesn't work very well for me. And we'll say, well, come, let's take a walk. And we go walk through the office. All the people who work for them have those books in exactly the same place. And the reason is they've seen that more senior person be successful. And so they're trying to emulate that success. Yeah. And so a lot of times, and this one's very specific to law, but you see it in corporate and other places too. It's actually funny. I saw it with our priest at home. He's been doing something the same way, that seeing frustrations that you feel kind of played out in your office, and recognizing that that's a frustration across the organization and making changes in the workplace to improve that. These little 1 or 2% edges in, how you can improve the support to the workforce add up really quickly. And you're trying to get to a point that it's more comfortable, it's more collaborative, but it's also more productive and more supporting to do your work from the office. And it's little things like that that make a big difference. So get up, walk around, observe what people are doing, and look for the behaviors that you feel are really driving the organization forward, and find ways to have the workplace better support those.
Grace, am I walking around in the office enough?
All the time.
Right.
I think you are.
Good.
I mean, I'm handing out bubble gum so people come to my cubicle.
I haven't gotten any bubble gum yet, so.
It's such an interesting concept, though, because we do have such range in this office, but everybody works together so well. And I think we can credit that to like the circular design of our office space. And you go to the bathroom, you have to pass somebody.
It is interesting. One insurance company, for their leaders, as we started to bring people back, they were so focused on, we don't know when people in the office, we're not connecting with them. We created an app on their watch that every time they get up from their desk to go to the restroom or get a cup of coffee, they tap their walk app and it tells them what path they have to take.
Oh, that's cool. I like that.
And just that with that, and they're on the West Coast, that leadership group, they're like, that was like a total game changer. And they're like, we didn't change anything. It's the same distance, to where we're trying to go from where we are, but you came up with 3 alternate paths. We see people, we connect with people. Yeah, we've had to add 5 minutes or so to our timing to do things. But they're like, just that element of behavior has totally shifted how we manage our people, how we connect with our people, satisfaction from an employee perspective. They feel like they're being seen in the office. And then the ability for people who need a minute to get a decision or direction from you. And Cal, I see you shaking your head. We talk about there's 5 different no's. And so 3 of those you can only understand by being in the room with the person. And so there's the real casual no, don't do that again. But then there's like a hard no, don't ever do that again in your career. No, and you need to be in the room to understand the depth of that. And so all these little nuances to working together, we're missing.
It's so interesting. I could talk about this for hours with you, or listen to you talk about it for hours.
Agreed.
So I don't know how much time we have left, Grace, but I think one of the things that we haven't touched on yet, and really one of the main reasons why you're here, is the industrial market and logistics and so forth. And as you mentioned, you're here for a meeting with our client Moog, who we are fortunate enough to represent both locally and then you across the world, correct? You got some stuff going on with them in India, I believe?
In Asia, certainly.
So, okay, great. So what are some of the trends you're seeing in the industrial and logistics world? Obviously coming out of COVID, it's changed, but now there's a lot of uncertainty in the future now with what's coming out of the White House.
Really understanding everything from an input and an output perspective. And part of what I do is workplace, but the other component of it is more broadly across our global consulting platform. And so we're working with a lot of organizations to understand the impact of their logistics, to understand just in time, to understand raw materials in and kind of product out. A lot of organizations are looking to kind of reshore either manufacturing or kind of assembly of different elements. And I mean, you guys can literally see what's happening, from here across the border. And we're seeing things change, like, less cargo containers coming into the US and more coming into Mexico and Canada. And it's just because, organizations don't know yet how to address it. But this gets back to the predictive modeling that we're doing. So while everybody, during COVID was kind of focused on return to office, we built a platform called Newlytic Quest, which is on the back of our analytics platform, Newlytic, or our analytics and kind of management platform. And so what we do with that tool is we can look at different factors associated with everything from kind of who are your buyers. We're working with one large retail organization that we know down to the level of, like, based on the person who placed the order, did they place it because of the catalog, because of a news ad or a TV ad, because of something they saw on social media? And we're not having to ask them the question. We're coding things into how they make their buying choice that let us know that information on the back end. And so understanding the implications on their manufacturing side, their warehousing side, their retailing side, which is a big part of a lot of company portfolios in that world as well. Mm-hmm. And then I think the other thing that we're seeing and we're working a lot on is just robotics. And I know we've talked a lot about cold storage lately. So when you look at your cost to store something or cost to warehouse and manufacture something, how are robotics going to come in, and how is AI on top of the robotics going to come in a predictive way and shape your use of the industrial space? And we were just talking here earlier this week about, elements of, automation, robotics, and, new manufacturing practices that, not so much are going to focus on replacing the people, but are going to, increase quality levels and provide, new kind of customized ways to manufacture things. So, like Nike, you can go in and kind of, design your own shoe. Think about that around other elements of what we purchase, and whether it's customization or kind of true design and manufacturing in those models, a lot of that's shaping the industrial market. And then I could go on for days. So like old product, new product, where it's looking, access to it. And then a lot today shifts to kind of the energy model. And so, what's the energy component of a warehouse or warehouse portfolio? And, what's the short and long-term requirements for that infrastructure too?
Yeah, absolutely. Power is a big topic of discussion right now with data centers and AI and a lack thereof in our grid, and how the condition of our grid. And,
not just data centers, but I mean, just hardcore manufacturing. And so making sure that long-term you've got the power to do some of the more dense things. Mm-hmm. And then I know we're looking a lot at picking systems. And so there's one product that's kind of called the Cube, which is like a 3-story by 3-story box that picks product, packages the product, and then prepares it to go out with Amazon or FedEx from a shipping perspective. And just this like speed to market that also got upended during COVID, where, I mean, if I go on Amazon, I can't get it the next day, I'll go order something else. The COVID caused this expectation shift that, we're expecting go pick it up at the retail outlet timing for stuff shipped directly to us. And to do that, we're having to kind of customize the picking and packaging approach. And that's one of the things I started back in 20 plus years ago at Accenture.
Yeah.
Is old packing systems that got into conveyors.
Mm-hmm.
They have these things now where like robots go pick out of the warehouse and bring it to the person who packages it, who does the QC and kind of puts the products in a box. I would say the biggest shift in industrial that's driving industrial is just expectation.
Yeah.
It's insane. Everything is just getting faster and faster. I can't imagine where you just want everything at our fingertips.
Well, I mean, you've not been doing the real estate side for a long time. Mm-hmm. So real estate has been one of the things that it took a long time to select it, plan it. We have this new concept called turnkey. So if you think of turnkey, but this is furnished turnkey. And not just furnished with the furniture, but all the technology, the data connectivity is already there. So like literally, you can come in and put your sign up on day one and go to business on day two. Mm-hmm. And so, almost that same, Amazon Prime version of real estate.
A level up from co-working, it sounds like.
Well, customized to you,
yeah.
And the ability for you to kind of own it and manage it. I mean, it is interesting, co-working kind of drove a certain type of behavior that wasn't always aligned with what organizations were trying to do, especially on the security and the creativity side.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I just love the, kind of the what's next relative to the, kind of rapid deployment of real estate perspective.
Amazing. Thank you so much for letting us pick your brain. Hopefully we'll have you back again soon. Hopefully you'll be back in Buffalo from Atlanta again.
He'll be back. We need him.
We love doing this. I think, one of the things that we're really focused on is like, workplaces trying to take advantage of new medias. This is a great platform.
Well, thanks. We appreciate you taking the time to be on it. I know you came here for 48 hours with a few important clients and you gave us one of those hours. So we appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for listening. We hope you'll be back next time. Please be sure to check out our show notes where you'll see some helpful resources and a client version of Workplace Wednesday, which entails the latest news and real-time guidance. Until next time.